So as I'm recording this, the date is October the 20th, 2021. Last night the Edmonton Oilers played the Anaheim Ducks and came out with a fantastic 6-5 win. It was a really entertaining win between two teams that are, one team that is maybe not as established as a powerhouse as it should be, and another team that is really an up-and-comer. This particular edition, you would say, of the Anaheim Ducks actually looks quite a bit more like the 2005-06 Anaheim Ducks than they have in quite a long time. They've got a lot of fantastic up-and-coming talent, and they've got a few veteran players out there to kind of usher them along and mentor them. But over the next few years, I think that the Anaheim Ducks are again going to be a really exciting team to watch. Or at least they could be if they can do themselves one little favor, and that is that they probably should do what the Edmonton Oilers should have done a lot sooner when they had him in their in their service, and that is head coach Dallas Eakins. Didn't even realize that Dallas Eakins was coaching in Anaheim until just a few hours before the game last night, and honestly, I had to laugh a little bit that anybody in the NHL is actually still bothering to hire this bum. Maybe there must be a coaching shortage out there. Because in all honesty, not only was hiring Dallas Eakins, easily the worst coaching decision that was ever made in the history of the Edmonton Oilers, but firing Ralph Kreuger in order to hire Dallas Eakins was hands down the single worst HR decision in the history of that club. And it basically came down to something so simple as this. Was that when Ralph Kreuger took over the Edmonton Oilers from the previous head coach, Tom Reddy, the team improved immediately under his coaching. And actually they improved pretty significantly. But somehow at the end of that season, having come within a few points of making the playoffs, admittedly in a shortened season, but having come within a few points of the playoffs, but missing again for the umpteenth year in a row, the incoming general manager, Craig McTavish, just decided on a whim that he wanted to hire his own head coach. He didn't want to stick with Ralph Kreuger. He wanted to hire his own guy, and the guy that he brought in was the guy who was the coach of the Edmonton Oilers farm club at the time, Dallas Eakins. And so Dallas Eakins came in and he said that he was going to focus on fitness and things like that, which is, maybe a great thing for, say, an assistant coach to work on. But for a head coach to be primarily focused on that and to basically ignore everything else that was going on with his team didn't turn out to be a recipe for success. And so the Edmonton Oilers were not any better under Dallas Eakins than they were under Ralph Kreuger. They were, in fact, worse. As a matter of fact, they were a lot worse. And then they were a lot worse the season after that. And so it was an absolute disaster. It was at a time when the Oilers could afford to have that kind of a setback at the absolute least. They had the first overall pick from a few years previous, Nail Yakupov. And not only did the entire team just degenerate, just disintegrate under Dallas Eakins' leadership, but actually you can look at what Nail Yakupov did under Eakins compared to what he was able to do under Kreuger, and you could actually look at Dallas Eakins' coaching as potentially a factor, in what was probably one of the biggest gut punches in the history of the Edmonton Oilers organization. The way that highly touted draft pick that everybody was excited for just went to shit. You can see, you can look at his stats, compare them over the length of the season, and under Eakins, the team just got worse and worse, and Nail Yakupov just got worse and worse. But if that wasn't bad enough, not only did the team get worse under Dallas Eakins, but Dallas Eakins actually got a second opportunity. Ralph Kreuger came in, coached for one season, the team improved, and then they fired him, and then the team got worse under Dallas Eakins, and then in the second season, it got worse again under Dallas Eakins. And there's a lot of different perspectives to look at this issue from, but one of the biggest one of the biggest disasters involved in this whole thing was actually what was inflicted upon the Edmonton Oilers culture. There was a message that was basically sent to coaches, to prospective coaches, and that was simply this, was that improvement wasn't a thing that was going to be rewarded if you were coaching the Edmonton Oilers. I mean, yeah, not making the playoffs is one thing, but coming in and improving the team, even if you don't make the playoffs, should still have some value. That's a coach that probably should get a second kick at the can. But he was basically fired on a whim. And then not only did they fired him on a whim, but they gave a second chance to the guy who came in and made the club worse. It sends a terrible message to the people who coach your team or the people who might coach your team. It actually suggests that failure, that there's a higher tolerance within the club for failure than there is for just improvement. There were scale of value questions there that, quite frankly, they just do not have a good answer. And so while I was talking about this on Twitter last night, there was one thing that was brought up to my attention, and this was actually kind of a predictable response. That is, somebody pointed out that, Ralph Kreuger was coaching last year in Buffalo, and they did terribly. And that Ralph Kreuger's coaching probably had a lot to do with it. I'm going to say this much. Yeah, that's probably true. That's probably true. But that was last year in Buffalo, not years ago in Edmonton. These are two different things. You're comparing apples to oranges. Ralph Kreuger did not have to light the league on fire last year for it to have been a mistake for the Edmonton Oilers to sign Dallas Eakins. And the thing about it, I mean, and it's a little bit hard to say this, as an Oilers fan, but I really do hope that somebody in the Anaheim organization has the good sense, to basically do what's necessary for their organization to progress here. Because they have some fantastic up-and-coming talent on that team. In particular, Sam Steele is a guy that I enjoyed watching for a lot of years as a member of the Regina Pats. It actually surprises me a lot that Sam Steele hasn't been in the league more than he already has. But when he really finds his full stride in the NHL, he is going to be an absolute superstar. But you also have to ask yourself, is there anybody who could ruin that? And yeah, there is. There is somebody in the story who could ruin that. Dallas Eakins is a person who could ruin that. And arguably, potentially, debatably, we might have seen that sort of thing already. He could potentially ruin Sam Steele the way that he arguably, possibly, ruined Nail Yakupov. And not only would that be a huge blow for the Anaheim Ducks organization, but it would be a huge blow for hockey in general. I mean, don't get me wrong, I am a huge proponent of the growth mindset, and so I do think that it is entirely possible that perhaps Dallas Eakins has gotten better and grown as a coach, since his time in Edmonton. But I think that his time as the coach in San Jose doesn't really bear that out very well. I think you do have to ask yourself the question, is like, if you believe in the growth mindset, what kind of person is the person most likely, to grow and improve? And is it the guy that used to call timeouts so that he could go lean on the glass and not even bother to coach his team? Yeah, probably not. And by the way, I'm not pulling your leg. Dallas Eakins actually used to do that. He used to call timeouts and then go lean on the glass. Like,